traveling all this way. And, you know, I said earlier, Tadaima means welcome home. And I know the ancestors would say that. God, I'm tearing up. Anyways, it's crazy, right? Thank you for traveling all this way, coming. Please meet the families that are here, all the struggles that they have gone through. And please enjoy yourself. And there's snacks here, and ice and water. And please grab your drinks before the ice melts. And enjoy. And we'll see you tomorrow. Again, thanks for coming.
But this doesn't automatically.
So have you gone down there before?
Yeah, we've been to the pond. Are you counting?
Hi Kim, my name's Emmett.
We did? Yeah.
Oh, we found your sister. So we're sitting down now.
Oh, Kim?
Yeah, we found her.
Oh.
And she,
Me neither. I was just like, I don't care.
It's back.
I'm not back yet. I'm not back yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, Niall. Okay.
I think you need the big ugly ones.
Ugly ones, yeah. Which I remember my dad would always go clamming, and he'd be like, he'd always smash the shell. He'd be like, look what I got, and it'd be like this clam that's all hacked to pieces.
All you have to do.
She's got it.
Oh, good.
Yes.
He's famous.
Janice, there's the paparazzi are everywhere. So do you, precious. I should take you a picture. Let me see. Where's Stuart?
It's right here. There's Stuart.
Stuart, you're famous.
Let's see Stuart.
And Nate, we should take a picture. Oh no, she's not in that picture.
But her name's on the
Just
side.
on
Yeah, she's on here.
Her
Her
name
name is on the She was a side. newborn.
Yeah.
We almost drove right past this. We thought we were lost.
Good thing they saw you guys down
You're
here.
famous
Yeah.
too. Your name's on. Hi. Hello.
Boy, Randy's pretty quick.
Hi, Camille.
Hello.
Say hi to the camera.
Sorry.
sorry.
Great.
Yeah, very. Keetley Farm. Oh my gosh. There's a picture of the kids.
Where are we, Meg? Right here? You're on this side of the camera now.
All right. Hilo.
here?
That's our family's kind of like zoom in.
Who's that cute girl?
Arlen, shrimp tempura.
Adiel.
Yes.
Good to see you.
This for the upper dam.
Thanks again.
Which one is that now?
I steady.
I steady. Which bar?
I steady. Yeah.
I was
Steady,
looking at a whole bunch
steady,
of
steady.
Oh, that was Eddie.
Be steady.
Smile.
Yeah, they've been doing a lot of work. They started with thinking there'd be 50 to 100 people. It's great to see you all here and just kind of start bringing back memories. So anyway, we would like to start off with Mary explaining why she and Brent started on this whole journey, and I think they kind of kicked themselves after a while.
I didn't sleep very well last night, so if I sound a little woozy, just ignore me. I just wanted to say thank you all for coming, and I wanted to really say that this gathering today is really about all of us. And, you know, it's about you, me, all of us who are descendants of the Keetley pioneers, the people, the brave, courageous people. We are who we are because of who they were. They were courageous. Our families, our parents, grandparents, uncle, aunts, everyone who dared to leave their homes and chose to self-evacuate to an unknown and unfamiliar land during the most frightening and dangerous period for all Japanese Americans. We cannot even begin to imagine the fear they must have all felt. You and I, we are so fortunate because they left us a legacy of pure courage, because that is what it took for every individual. You know, if you think about what Keetley was like in 1942, you look at these photographs of those beaten up buildings, who on earth would want to live there? No one, absolutely no one would choose to live there. And in an area surrounded by a community that didn't want any Japanese, but they had little choice. They needed shelter quickly, and at least there were buildings that could be built and fixed up and livable. So what they did in making this land into a successful farm and gaining the respect from the surrounding community, it's an extraordinary story. It really is an extraordinary story. I would like to briefly explain why Brent and I put the Keetley historical signs together. About 5 or 6 years ago, I heard from our nephew Niall saying that he went to Jordanelle and saw a sign there that said WADA. He saw a sign that said WADA on it, and it was so touching to know that someone had put that there. So I told Brent that I wanted to go and see the sign. Well, we did go, along with our son, our granddaughters, my cousin Kim Yamada and her family, my nieces Christy, Nicole, and Andre and their families. We all went to Keetley, came here just to see this little sign that said Wada Way. There was even a Wada Point and a Keetley and Fisher Bay on the map. I was just so thrilled and so excited. So after we returned home, I felt that there had to be an explanation, a story that goes with these names, and that is why we started the signs. Although it took many years to get the permission from the Jordanelle staff to finally get the signs up, they are up. Besides thanking Brent for his help, I would like to thank Tom Endo, who is not here but has given us a wealth of information about the Endo Iwamoto Tachiki family in Keetley. And I want to give special thanks to Lance Kitagawa for editing the photos for the signs, and a special thanks to Doug Beagle, my niece Isaiah's Wada's husband, who is an expert on signs, and I just had to get his help, and the signs just came out beautifully. And thank you both, Doug and Lance. I also want to thank the Jordanelle staff for allowing us to share and show the Keetley story to everyone. Keetley is not only a story about the Japanese Americans during these frightful years, it's an American story about patriotism, patriotic Americans, a story about our family, our courageous family here in Keetley. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Mary. It's interesting listening to this. I didn't know a lot that I have started hearing about it and started talking about it. And I have a few clients that live in Heber City and they say, oh yeah, we've seen it in the newspaper. But it's, you know, it's kind of nice to know that my uncle took part and did all of this. So anyway, John? You gotta speak loud.
Thank you, Stuart. Mr. Ichiro Endo, 34. Mrs. Fumie Endo, 28. Jane Endo, 5. Richard Endo, 3. These are ages, by the way. Kay Endo, 1. Wesley Endo, newborn. Mr. Frank Endo, 32. Mrs. Yoshiko Endo, 24. Alice Endo, 3. Thomas Endo, 1. Mr. Sanjiro Shibuya, 58. Mr. Nobuzo Endo, 30. Mrs. Michie Endo, 29. Jason Endo, 3. Jerry Endo, 2. Grace Endo, 1. Mrs. Now Endo, 53. Goro Endo, 22. Roy Endo, 20. Miyoko Endo, 18. Hachiro Endo, 15. Mary Endo, 14. Hachiro Endo, 13. Mrs. Mine Sugiyama, 72. Mr. Kuzo Sugiyama, 43. Mrs. Uta Sugiyama, 40. Fumiko Sugiyama, 21. Naoe Sugiyama, 20. Misao Sugiyama, 18. Hideo Sugiyama, 15. Isamu Sugiyama, 12. Yoshio Sugiyama, 7. Michio Sugiyama, 5. Mariko Sugiyama, 1. Mrs. Toki Iwamoto, 51. Miyoko Iwamoto, 21. Chiyoko Iwamoto, 16. Mr. Robert Iwamoto, 40. Mrs. Tomiko Iwamoto, 30. Edward Iwamoto, 9. June Iwamoto, 6. Henry Iwamoto, 4. Mrs. Hiroshi Endo, 24. Mrs. Asako Endo, 23. Marlene Endo, newborn. Mrs. Sai Tori Iwamoto, 41. Takeo Iwamoto, 20. Yaeko Iwamoto, 18. Kyoko Iwamoto, 16. Teruko Iwamoto, 14. Mr. Shunji Yamasaki, 31. Mrs. Haneko Yamasaki, 24. Tetsuo Yamasaki, 4. Mrs. Yoneko Furuya, 27. Ritsuko Furuya, 6. Mikio Furuya, 4. Seiji Furuya, 2. Naoko Furuya, 6 months. Mr. Yasuhachi Nakashima, 56, I'm sorry. Mrs. Mon Nakashima, 53. Masanobu Nakashima, 22. Chiyoko Nakashima, 20. Mieko Nakashima, 14. Mr. Senmatsu Honda, 62. Mrs. Sumi Honda, 54. Kaoru Bill Honda, 23. Ben Honda, 20. I'm sorry. Mr. Tsunesaburo Hayashi, 59. Mr. Noboru Takahashi, 19. Mr. Fred Wada, 34. Mrs. Masako Wada, 28. Grace Wada, 7. Fred Wada Jr., 3. Mary Wada, 1. Edwin Wada, newborn. Miss Martha Wada, 19. Mrs. Eiko Yamada, 33. Yoneko Yamada, 12. Hisashi Yamada, 10. Kimio Yamada, 6. Hiroyo Yamada, 4. Mr. Nobukazu Tsujimoto, 31. Mrs. Toshiko Tsujimoto, 28. Dennis Tsujimoto, 3. Stuart Tsujimoto, 1. May Tsujimoto, newborn. Mrs. A. Tsujimoto, 52. Fred Tsujimoto, 30. Ruth Tsujimoto, 28. Masao Tsujimoto, 25. Toyoko Tsujimoto, 21. Mrs. Chio Tanaka. Gus Tanaka, 12. Toshi Tanaka, 9. Mr. Noakichi Tabata, 73. Jack Tabata, 26. Noboru Tabata. Matsuyo Tabata, 17. Mr. Masaru Yamamoto, 29. Mrs. Yukie Yamamoto, 25. Howard Yamamoto, 4. Catherine Yamamoto, 4 months. Mr. Kusumatsu Yamada, 63. Mrs. Fusa Yamada, 53. Yoshio Yamada, 28. Tori Yamada, 19. That was Tom Yamada. My eyes are getting kind of watery. That was Tom Yamada, 19. William Yamada, 17. Mary Yamada, 15. May Yamada, 13. Fred Yamada, 12. Roy Yamada, 10. Mr. Danjuro Okamoto, 43. Mrs. Dikue Okamoto, 41. Jim Okamoto, 21. Kazuko Okamoto, 18. Akira Okamoto, 15. Mr. Danjiro Okamoto, 45. Mrs. Shizuko Takigawa, 39. Kei Takigawa, 18. Bill Takigawa, 16. Susan Takigawa, 15. Mitzi Takigawa, 13. Mr. George Takigawa, 29. Mrs. Toshiko Takigawa, 26. Jean Takigawa, 4. Kei Takigawa, 2. David Takigawa, 5 months. Mrs. Aki Takigawa, 53. Mr. Frank Sakino, 21. And Mr. Harry Haruo Sakino, 19.
Thank you, John. By the way, this list was put together by Toyoko Tsujimoto when she was 21 years old.
Hello, everyone. In 1973, Mary and I were moving from Massachusetts to Oregon, and on our cross-country trip, we saw the old gray weathered houses, and she told me this story. We are here today to remember what began in Keetley, March 1942, 80 years ago. We are here to celebrate the courage, the sacrifice, the very, very hard work the evacuees gave to make Keetley Farm a success. We are here to celebrate the bravery of the people who chose to leave the West Coast on their own during a 38-day period that the government allowed self-evacuation. Now, why 38 days? There were 38 days between the signing of Executive Order 9066 and the military authorities on the West Coast issuing Public Proclamation number 4, which declared that all self-evacuation would not be allowed after March 29th, 1942. So that makes 38 days. After March 29th, all people of Japanese ancestry that were still in West Coast states were ordered to stay in place and wait to be sent to camps. So the people who self-evacuated to Keetley had to accomplish the following within 38 days in order to leave the West Coast as free people. As you know, 38 days can pass quickly. In just 38 days, they had to decide whether to self-evacuate. Not an easy decision. Consider the unknowns they faced, the uncertainties, the difficulties of deciding. They had to find a place inland to evacuate to that would accept Japanese Americans and a place that would provide, a means for self-support financially. They had to transport or ship necessary possessions, clothing, cooking equipment, essential farm equipment, tractors, implements, hand tools needed to run a farm. Finally, they had to physically leave the West Coast states by the deadline, midnight, pardon me, March 29th, 1942, and travel to the new location. Can you imagine the uncertainty, the fear, the anxiety, and how they wondered, how will we be treated in Utah? Will we be able to survive the hardship and financially sustain ourselves there? So imagine yourself in that situation. We all came here, we came from our wonderful homes, we came from, we had all our possessions and everything. Imagine not being able to go back, that you've abandoned your house, that you've abandoned your possessions, that you came here with whatever you could carry in your car. Imagine that situation. Okay, so what was Keetley like before 1942? There was mining nearby. The Pony filled the area with buildings that housed up to 600 miners. He leased the rest of the land for a schoolhouse, a store, an amusement hall called the Blue Goose, and the Blue Goose hosted boxing matches, dance nights, and had pool tables, a marble top bar, and during Prohibition, a bootlegging operation. All the mining pretty much shut down, so Keetley became a ghost town. So why did the self-evacuees settle in Keetley? What happened? What's the story? There are many events that he decided to travel to Utah to seek a place to evacuate his family and possibly open a business there. He had heard there was a labor shortage there, and his wife, Masako, was born up in an internment camp. Governor Ma told him that he had to meet with counties that were willing to allow Japanese Americans to settle in their counties. There were 20 willing to meet with Mr. Wada and discuss possible settlement. They were Duchesne County and Wasatch counties. While in Salt Lake City, he also met with David Trevor. He had a ranch. The ranch buildings were used for homes in the past by miners while the silver mine was active. So while in Salt Lake City, Wada met Mai Chan at the U.S. Cafe owned by the Tsuyuki family. Frank Endo and Roy Tachiki represented their extended families who also were trying to self-evacuate to Utah. The three of them decided to travel together to their family car and John Aoki to drive the three men to Roosevelt. A meeting of county officials and others had been scheduled to be held in Roosevelt to discuss possible settlement of Japanese Americans. There was a labor shortage, so the local farmers needed laborers to complete various seasonal work. Keetley was located about 40 miles east of Salt Lake City and on the route to Roosevelt. Wada, on the advice of Trevithick, decided to stop in Keetley and speak with George Fisher. At that time, in March, the land was under snow at the time, and so it was impossible to tell how productive the soil might be. They continued on to Roosevelt for the meeting. Fred Wada, Frank Endo, and Roy Tachiki to meet. Some people had lost relatives at Pearl Harbor, but others needed laborers to help with agricultural work. But the overall response appeared to be favorable to allow the evacuees to settle in Duchesne County. But a very important consideration was that Roosevelt was over 140 miles from Salt Lake City. Three men went to eat at a local restaurant. They had paid in advance for motel rooms for the night, but they were harassed and felt threatened at the restaurant and left the town without getting a refund for the motel rooms. That fearful experience convinced the three men that Roosevelt in Duchesne County was not the place they wanted to move their families to. Wasatch County, where Keetley was located, was the other county willing to consider having the evacuees settled. Keetley. This article came out just 3 months. 3 months after the evacuees had settled in Keetley, and I think this article, only 3 months after the people settled here, reflects an improving attitude toward the evacuees. New home for Japanese thriving in Utah area. 90 Japanese American evacuees are carving a new agriculture community out of rolling sagebrush land at this mountain crossroads. These transplanted farmers and businessmen aren't receiving a cent of financial subsidy from the federal government or from any outside source. They have stated their respective futures on their own hard work. American Fair Play and 3,800 acres of largely virgin valley land owned by George Fisher. Most of the 90 live in weather-beaten 3-story boarding house left over from Keetley's bright era when there was mining. Others have taken deserted dwellings of smaller size. Clearing the land is a back-breaking job. The men, ranging in age from 17 to more than 70, are in the fields from sunrise to after dark, 16 to 18 hours on many days. Later in the article, Fred Wada is quoted by the newspaper. Fred Iwata, who used to operate a chain of produce markets in Oakland, is the colony's leader. He hopes for the best, but isn't making any rosy predictions until the colony has had a longer trial. We're going to do our best, he says, but if we make it this year at all, there won't be anything left over for profit. Next year should be easier. While the men work and the women and children care for pigs, chickens, and occasional goat that are kept in well-worn ranch barns. WADA has organized a Boy Scout troop among the youngsters. There is a young men's basketball team which plays with nearby high schools. Next year, the colony children will attend regular schools. Soon after the people had arrived in Keetley, there were several incidents of dynamite explosions late at night near the new colony. No one was injured. The local sheriff investigated. The sheriff thought that it was simply someone having fun. Others thought it was due to resentment toward the settlement of the evacuees. The sheriff posted a guard for a while, but no further explosions occurred. After Governor Ma learned of the dynamite explosions, he sent a letter to Fred Wada telling him take his Japanese colony back to California. But my father-in-law, being the person he was, he told his wife and then ignored the letter because no one could return to California. Later on, after a very successful harvest at Keetley Farm, Fred Wada sent Governor Ma a large box of their finest beets, lettuce, peas, turnips, and onions. And the governor replied in a letter dated July 30th, only 3 months or 4 months of the growing season here, and praised the Japanese colony. You are proving by your work that you are loyal, high-class citizens. Keetley Farm eventually became known as the most successful mountain farm in Utah. So let us remember the courage, the bravery of the evacuees. They were willing to risk everything, their futures, their savings, and to work very, very hard to create a successful farm at 6,000 feet elevation. And they were free. Thank you, Brett.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is so special for all of us to get together. My name is May Miwako Yamada Kong. I was born and raised in San Jose, California. I am 94 years old, and I had 6 brothers and 2 sisters. I am by myself now since my husband, Vivian, is deceased, but I have my 3 sons and 2 daughters. Here with me today are my eldest son, Ernie, and his wife, Maria, my eldest daughter, Elizabeth, my son, Emmett, and my daughter, Cecilia, with her 2 daughters, Miley and Jay. My son Jeffrey and his wife Carrie are on a trip but they wish they would celebrate with us today, but I had other arrangements. Also with me is Ernie's eldest son from Santa Monica, Jason and his wife.
Kelly.
Where are they?
Right there. They're right there.
Okay. Kelly and their kids, my great-grandchildren, Makoa and Casey. Ernie's daughter, Christina, sends her regards from San Jose, where she is working today. Emmett's daughter, Stephanie, sends her love from Brazil. I want to acknowledge my brother Roy's daughter, Mika Takeuchi, whom I consider to be my third daughter. And she is accompanied by her wonderful, very soon-to-be husband, Jean-Francois, who has come all the way from France to share in this moment. Thank you. The Yamadas are a big family, and I am so proud to be here with the children and spouses and grandchildren of my siblings. I hope you get the chance to meet all of us. In 1942, I was 14 years old, just shy of 3 months of graduating from grammar school, when we had to evacuate from the West Coast. We were forced to leave due to the executive order number 9066 from the president. My father, Kusumatsu Yamada, was a farmer, and he and my mother, Fusa Yamada, decided we as a family would not be placed in an internment camp, but instead would relocate with other families to Utah. To make the trip, we could not take a lot of personal belongings. My mother told us to break Japanese records over our heads because we could not take them. My brother Yoshio, the oldest, had a Japanese sword in the attic, and another brother, Tommy, who dug many holes around our barn to hide coins in the ground. Both brothers, hoping these items would be back when we returned. They were not. The farm equipment was the most important possession we needed to take with us. My brother Yoshio was responsible for getting the bigger items on the train. In fact, he departed on the train on April the 21st, 1942, almost 1 month after the March the 28th deadline under military order, pursuant to Executive Order number 9066. My brother was so lucky he did not get caught or put in jail. We also used our big truck and loaded other essentials from the farm equipment. Other families from Monterey, San Jose were among the families who would meet us in Utah. Thank goodness we had Mr. Fred Wada and his wife Masako to help all the families move to the Wasatch County, Keetley, Utah. My daughter Mary, his daughter Mary and her husband Brent are here today, and I know I'll speak for everyone when I say we are so grateful to you for taking so much time to arrange our happy gathering and for making the signs at Jordanelle Reservoir a symbol and reminder for all of us to see part of our lives. Mary, I am sure your father and mother are very proud of you. Mary and Brent, would you mind please stand up so we can recognize and honor you. It took us 3 days to reach our destination. On the first day, I remember we stayed with cousins so we could rest and eat. On the second day of travel, I remember seeing what looked like white sand, which I learned later was actually salt. On the third day, we arrived at our new home, and which was located by a large cow pasture. We all worked to help clear the area by removing rocks and sagebrushes because we would use this area to raise all kinds of vegetables and fruits. We also had great fun around this cow pasture during the winter months with the snow, the toboggan, and ice skates. We survived by selling fruits and vegetables to the local farmers and the markets, and we divided all the money amongst the families. I and the other children were also enrolled in the nearby school. I remember on the first day of school, the principal gathered all the students before school started and told them if any students call us Jap, that they will be expelled. I think in the beginning, my students were afraid of Japanese, but very soon we became friends. I played basketball, softball, volleyball, and even had a family tell me I could stay in Utah and live with them instead of going back to California. But of course, my father said no, because I am a girl. I took away good memories from my time at school to try and show that we too were good Americans. My mother placed an American flag on the front door with a picture of each of her sons who were away proudly serving the U.S. military. After the war, most of the families returned where they came from. When we returned home to San Jose, we saw a Caucasian family living in our house. We were able to lease the land across the street and again started over. My family worked hard, and my father and my brother Yoshio decided it was time to buy our own land again. We found a large 20-acre ranch which had a big house so we could all live together. We eventually bought another large ranch where we grew cherries and vegetables. I am now living with my youngest daughter, Cecilia, my granddaughter, Miley and Jade, and our dog, Striker, and our 2 cats. I am so happy to be here with all of you. It is my hope you will cherish this time together and always remember to learn about your past and take it with you as you make your own journey going forward. Thank you very much.
Next, we'd like to bring up Hubble. No, come on. Howard, I forget now, see? You can look at I always heard about him from my brother. So I guess him and Fred Wallace Jr. and my brother were always hanging around and probably got into a lot of trouble.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my name is Howard Habo Yamamoto. They all called me Habo at the time. I didn't learn that my English name was Howard. Not until I got into kindergarten. And I remember one thing my mother really stressed on me before going into kindergarten was learn to say bathroom. Right? Not benjo, bathroom. Okay. I'm one of the critters back here. Back row, third from the right. Let's see, wait. Okay, here we go. First of all, I want to thank Mary and Brett for forming this reunion. Now, Mary called me about 4 months ago, and she says, Hobble, I'm thinking of starting or bringing together people from Keetley. And I thought to myself, oh, great, this is great. And I told her, please sign me up. Now, what I pictured in my mind was 30 people, you know, we would get together in the same hotel, have dinner, we'll sit around in a circle and reminisce about Keetley. So when I asked Mary on the phone, how many do you expect? She said 100. And now, this was in my mind. I thought to myself, Mary, 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 what in the world have you been spoken? You know? But look at it now. What is it? 160? Amazing. This is amazing. Okay. You know what? Oh, I was instructed by my family to keep it nice, keep it short, and keep it concise. All right? Or, you know, they would give me the cut sign. But hey, you have to understand, as long as I have the mic, I have the power. Correct? Yeah, I could stay here all night. Right. But, you know, something's wrong here. I got the wrong, no. I don't know what they're complaining about, because my notes originally was 12 pages. All right. But now I got it down to 4. So they have nothing to complain about. But anyway, Keetley was a very unique experience. But before I talk about Keetley, I'd like to go back to December 7th, 1941. It was a very trying experience for the parents when Japan, you know, attacked Pearl Harbor. There was a lot of fear in the community. You have to understand, too, in those days, you had pockets of community. You know, you had the Japantown, right? You have Chinatown. You have, right now in LA, you have Koreantown and, Little Saigon, okay? And what they speak, their language within these communities is their native language. Once you step out, they have to deal with the English. And this is where a lot of the Japanese people have problems with, okay? Now, of course, the fear was great. I know my mother was extremely fearful of what's happened, all right? I remember her burning anything in the house that had anything to do with Japan. Magazines, books, letters, and worst of all, my Japanese toys. That really upset me. But anyway, you know, it's understandable. Another thing, what happened, I don't know if many of you know about it, but at that time, many Japanese men were arrested by the FBI. they swooped down on a lot of these men who were earmarked. And every day my mother would say, oh, Mr. So-and-so got arrested. Mr. So-and-so got arrested and such. They were arrested without any warrant, and they were not given any trial. They were not given any representation. They were segregated in separate prisons around the United States, and some in actual, not prisons, but camps around the United States, and also the prisons. I just found out, a few years ago that my distant cousin was incarcerated in Leavenworth. Now, Leavenworth is a federal prison. Now, can you imagine these men with families being taken away for 4 years? They weren't heard from again for 4 years until after the war. If they were married, the wives became a widow. And a lot of these wives were never heard from their husband until after the war. And I don't know now if any of us here could take that. I really don't. And you got to hand it to these people who survived through all this. But anyway, one reason it was so important that our family got out, that's myself, my sister, my mother, father, was 3 reasons. Number 1, my father was an illegal alien. Number 2, my father, when he was in his early 20s, he served in the Japanese Navy. That in itself, should seal it. And then 3rd, I later found out my real name, last name is Taniguchi, not Yamamoto, okay? So that's kind of, okay, Taniguchi, sounds all right, Howard Taniguchi. But anyway, so when my father, who was a good friend of Fred Wada, heard that he was going to form a group and find a place in Utah, a place called Keetley, he said immediately they signed on, all right? Now, you have to understand, in those days, we were not a mobile society. In those days, to travel 60 miles was a big deal. But to trek across California, Nevada, and Utah, it's almost unheard of. But anyway, we signed on. We packed what we could pack in our automobile with a few suitcases, all right? And we traveled across California, Nevada, and Utah. But I don't ever remember, I really don't ever remember staying in a hotel. I remember always sleeping in a car. I don't remember eating in a restaurant. My mother, I believe, would buy enough food to last us maybe 4 or 5 meals. Part of that was she was afraid to go into the hotel and try to get a room. She was afraid that they would mock her, they would call her names and such, all right? And so anyway, this is how we traveled across the, California, Nevada, and Utah. Now, in Utah, when we got to Keetley, it was quite an experience because my mother and father were shocked by what they saw. They didn't realize Keetley, Utah was a ghost town. You had abandoned apartments, and then you have scattering of homes, all right, abandoned. And anyway, we were lucky enough to get a little shed right next to the apartment. And that became our home because my father was a carpenter. And he fixed it up, and that's where we lived while we were in Utah. Now, see, the first week in Utah, I think we were greeted by, a dynamite, right? Yeah. Yeah, there was a dynamite. And so, you know, our welcoming community. Anyway, it was quite a, you know, for a child, especially like myself, who was, you know, 4 years old, it wasn't harsh, but I just can't believe how my parents and the other parents were able to live through all this, because we were pretty much in a, I would assume we were pretty much in a poverty level. Take a look at our clothes. Don't they all look like more of a hand-me-down type of, yeah? So anyway, from what I understand, Mr. Wada would get people, the families together, the heads of families, and discuss who needed the money. I guess they would pool their money, or the money they earned from selling the vegetables and such, and he would dole them out, all right? But more of the lighter side of Keetley is that Mr. Wada, who was an avid fisherman, I remember, made a pond. And he stocked it with trout for the kids to fish in. You know, I don't think he allowed, did he allow any adults in there? I don't believe so. Right?
Well, my grandfather used to take me when I was 5 or 6.
Yeah, that's right.
But just the families were there.
But anyway, he did that. The other thing was Mr. Wada would occasionally, I remember him holding bingo games and such, you know, to give some recreational time for the workers. But for myself, I remember Tokyo, Freddie Wada, Dennis Tsujimoto, and I. Right at the head of the Keetley was a convenience store. I don't know if it was a gas station either. It was a convenience store. We would go there every so often and just hang around, sit down, look forlorn, and the lady who owned the convenience store would come out and give each of us a little candy, you know, and we take it back, hide somewhere, eat it. But we made a vow, we don't tell our parents that, because then we would never be able to go back again. So today's, I guess today's the first time I let the secret out. Okay. But anyway, just to keep it short, anybody here related to a person by the name of Gene? Gene Kakigawa? Here's an incident happened. I remember this when I was small. One morning, Gene, G-E-N-E, who went skiing. I saw him go out from the apartment with skis on. Okay, skis. He went off into the mountain somewhere here. Later in the afternoon, he came back, all bloody, bleeding from the nose, cut on his face, and my mother and the ladies in the apartment, they were panicking. And what they had in their mind was Gene was mugged by anti-Japanese people, all right? But later they were so relieved when they found out actually what happened. Gene ran into a tree. Okay. So they were so happy. I mean, how can you be so happy when someone runs into a tree? But they were. But anyway, before I conclude, Mary told me this. Please don't talk too much about my father, okay? I can't conclude this without saying something about Fred Wada. Here was a guy, extremely dynamic. He was a leader. He was harsh. He was harsh. He had an 8th grade education, somewhat unpolished. Am I allowed to say that?
Say whatever you want.
Whatever I want, okay. But anyway, I've never admired a man so much. You don't find people like that.
That's right.
You know. Also, he was a port commissioner in Los Angeles. He was instrumental in bringing the 1964 Olympics to Tokyo. All right, and also he was instrumental, I believe, in bringing the Olympics to Mexico. And I understand, just found out not too long ago that he actually escorted Peter Uberoff. Remember him? He formed the Los Angeles Olympics, and he took him over. He took Uberoff to Japan, I guess, to lay out plans for the Olympic. But anyway, I can't thank you all enough for coming here. Now, especially, I want to thank the descendants who brought your grandparents. I want to thank the descendants who brought your parents. And I want to thank the descendants who brought the memory of your family. But anyway, I want to thank you for coming, and I'm glad you withstood this.
Thank you very much.
For some of you that didn't know, Uncle Fred also brought the swim teams from Japan, and they were on a lot of the gold. So that's how you got really active. So he was always scouting for him. He also, him and George Arcani started Caro. A lot of you, if you're in the LA area, know about Caro for the elder people. And they started that, and that's still going. So, you know, like I say, it's amazing that he did some of these things starting when he was 34 years old. Jared, just tell us a few of the stories you have here.
I thought I got up here because I had this flower on my neck.
Let me hold your mic for you.
Oh, okay.
Or hold it close to your mouth. That's
Okay.
better. Okay. Okay.
Okay. So I can only talk about maybe one or two things, make it short. And so I don't remember, but this is what my father, Nobuso Endo, taught me. Back in early 40s, he was working for a packing shed down in Chula Vista, California, and the person that owned the packing shed had hired him and made him a field buyer. I guess back in those days, the produce that the different farmers raised, they would sell it to a packing shed. So my dad would go to different farmers and look at the tomatoes or corn or whatever they're growing, and he would tell them, well, if they had a 5-acre farm, they would give him maybe $500 for all the vegetables on that 5 acres, or maybe twice as much on a 10-acre farm. Anyway, so the farmer would continue raising that crop until they got ripe, and then the packing shed would send out some truck and people, and they would just pull the plants right out of the ground, take it back to the packing shed, and they would have some ladies sorting and packing the vegetables to send all over the country. So But during that time, the owner of the packing set, I guess he liked the way my father worked and everything. So he sent back to Japan and told this one lady to come out to California, to Chula Vista. And it turned out to be my mother, because of course this was one of those set up arrangements. So when she got there, her last name was Kobata, so, but anyway, she got introduced to my father, and they got married after that. Well, a little ways, maybe 4 or 5 years after that. I think this all started about 1935, and during that time, I guess they went out together, and also during that time, he had a fairly new car, like maybe a 1935 Chevrolet, and in 1942 he had a 1942 Chevrolet, so he was doing pretty good on the packing set company. So during that time, they were married, and I was born in I was born in National City, as well as my older brother, and then my younger sister, Grace. I believe she was born in National City Hospital there. But where I was born and my brother, we were born in a sanitarium, just a hospital for sanitarium people. And it's kind of hard to believe, but that's where we were born. And then when the war started, my dad had to pack everything up, and he had a fairly new car, so they took the back seat out and they put it on the hood of the car, or the roof of the car, and put some of their baggage up there. And in the back seat, where the back seat used to be, he put a 55-gallon drum and filled it with gas from the packing set gas tank, because apparently at that time, I don't know if some of the other people had this problem, but there was a gas rationing for people that drive their cars. You can only get so much gas every day. So my dad filled up this 55-gallon tank. I was on one side, and my brother was on the other side, and my sister Grace was in the front seat with my mother. And we drove back to Salt Lake City, and then we ended up in Keetley. So that was kind of a trip that I don't really remember that much, because I was only about 2 or 3. So anyway, that's something that happened I could talk a little bit about. And a second event, which happened here in Keetley, as I recall, and the way my father told me, is that there was a family or a bunch of people from, I think it's, I don't know if it was Oxnard or, no, I don't think it was Oxnard, but it was south of Point Loma along the coast. There was a big farming area where the farmers raised a lot of flowers. And maybe some of you people, your relatives raised flowers down in that area. But they had a couple big tractors, a Caterpillar and some tire tractors. And they brought those up to Keetley. And this must have been maybe May or June. And they used those tractors to move all the rocks, the big rocks, pull all the sagebrush out until they got maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10 acres of land open. And they plowed all the ground up, and they planted
fast-growing crops like radish, green onions, and lettuce. But when the lettuce started growing, they're maybe half grown, they had a very late frost, and all the lettuce was, they had to get rid of all the lettuce because it's too bad. So they had to plant a new crop of lettuce maybe in June or July. And some of the older people could confirm what I heard. But in August or so, September, the lettuce really grew big and they were ready to harvest. And then one day, all the deers from the hills came down and ate the lettuce. So they were kind of wiped out on the lettuce. So a lot of farmers back in those days, instead of trying to raise vegetables on that little land, they went down to Provo, Utah, Lehigh, and worked for the orchard people to pick whatever fruit they had on the trees, because they were hard pressed for workers to help them, because all their sons and relatives were drafted and they had to go to Europe or Japan or somewhere. But anyway, I think a lot of, I don't know, some of you older people here that were at Keetley, did you ever hear of anything like that going on? I guess not. But anyway, a lot of people after that, they decided they're going to go down into the valley and find their own type of work they like to do. So that's what my dad did. The next year he went down to a place called Keetley, Utah, and he farmed over there. And then he finally ended up in Midvale, Utah, where he had a farm for up to 1965, and we still own part of that land, although we sold a lot of it for a hotel and restaurant and some other medical building. So that's basically what, in a short, quick few minutes, I can talk about, because I haven't had time to do anything else. Okay, thank you.
Ryan, your photo still here? Oh, here he is. Can you come up and tell us a little bit? Ryan Yamamoto here is related to one of the Yamamotos. He's a San Francisco CBS anchorman. His grandparents were teachers. So anyway, we'd like to let you know why he's there. He's taking a bunch of films, so you might be on TV.
Thank you, Stuart. My name is Ryan Yamamoto. I'm the news anchor and one of the reporters for KPIX5, CBS News Bay Area. Started there in January, so I've been there for about 7 months now. I was in Seattle at Como News for about 6 years. But let me give you a little bit about my background. About 7 years ago, my wife and I completed a documentary out of the Japanese internment camps about Tommy Kono. And if you don't know who Tommy Kono is, he learned how to lift weights inside Tule Lake and later became the most decorated American weightlifter, even one of the greatest weightlifters that history has ever seen. So we were lucky enough to do that about 7 years ago, and that ran on PBS in about 55 different markets. But after we finished that documentary and we found that it was possible for us to even do a documentary, this story, Keetley Valley, had always been in the back of my head. And I always wanted to do this story, not because it's just a fascinating story and it's an untold story, but it's a personal story. My grandfather, my grandmother, my father, Howard, my auntie Keiko, they were there. It's part of my history. And to be able to tell a personal story and a historical story at the same time would be such an honor. And so when Mary had told us about, hey, we're gonna do maybe one last reunion, we were thinking, well, this is it. If we're gonna tell the story, we have to do it now. And so I went to my general manager, I went to my news director, and I pitched the story. I said, this is the story about the Japanese internment, but this is the untold story about the Japanese internment. And I highly expected them to say no, because it's going to cost money, we have to travel, and they gave us the full green light, and I was surprised. And then I was worried, because then, oh, we got to do the story now. So we booked the trip, and you see my photographer in the back there, Rick Villaroma. He does all the work. I take all the credit. No. But if you also notice too, he's shooting everything on an iPhone. So you're kind of our little lab experiment. So it's a bit of an experiment. So we're shooting the documentary as an experimental story also. But I do appreciate everyone here who has shared their stories with us. We don't know what the final story is going to look like right now. We have hours and hours of footage. Rick keeps reminding me how much footage I have to go through. So when we get back, we'll start kind of putting this together. The goal, I think the ultimate goal, is to have a half-hour documentary that will run on some of the CBS platforms. Hopefully we can show it to you also in other forms. But once again, I appreciate everyone sharing their stories. It's been an honor to see all these faces here and seeing everyone greet each other. And hopefully I'll do this story justice. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Ryan. We're going to take a 10-minute break, so anybody have we also want to note here for this break. We want to thank the Yamano family for bringing some desserts and some things for you to take home with you, some candy, just like we need this candy, right? So they brought a number of things, so after the lunch, you can help yourself.
We're going to have the Yamada girl pass them out right here in the break, so you can have it as a little snack.
So let's get back here in about 10 minutes.
Once again, thank you.
Yeah.
Simply, he just didn't know how to be in those roles. He's difficult to describe because he was just himself all the time. There's a favorite poem of mine by a Japanese poet named Nisa. And the poem goes, showing front, showing back, making us fall. In other words, the leaves going in all different directions just falls naturally to the ground. My father, too, he was just himself all the time until his death. The Japanese call this sonomama, just be as you are. And it isn't easy living with a person who was like that. When he was angry, he was angry. When he was happy, he showed his happiness. As a child, he was never taught how to master any social graces. It is important to know my father's childhood, because it was that period in his life that really shaped his future. And it is a sad childhood. He was born in 1907 in Wellington, Washington. His father's Zenbei came from Alabama, Japan. He went to Canada to be a fisherman, but for some reason he moved to Seattle. There, Zenbei sold vegetables from a truck. He married his young wife, Tamaya Kawabata, who was only 17, and he was in his mid-20s. They later moved to Bellingham, where he started a restaurant business and a new family. But he didn't stay in Bellingham very long. Sadly, when he went to San Francisco, Tamaya died by giving birth to her fourth child. She was around 23 or 24. So then all of the children are sent to Japan. And I don't know if my grandfather took all 4 children on that long journey to Japan by himself. Can you imagine 4 young children and 2 still in diapers, probably still drinking for a while? My father at age 5 was raised by his paternal grandparents. And the 3 girls were raised by a maternal side of the family. It must have been very lonely for my father to have been separated from his 3 younger sisters. He was raised by 2 elderly people who most likely didn't want to raise a young, active 5 years old. 5 years old, that would be 8 years age. One of the first things he was taught by his grandfather was to learn how to make his own sandals out of rice straw, because he had to walk 3 miles to school and 3 miles home, and his sandals would often fall apart. After school, his daily chores was to go up to the steep hill to a shop that sold satay. He would get something for his grandfather. I know it was a steep hill because Fred and I both were driven on it. He grew up eating gruel, they call it pie, cooked with sweet potatoes and he had dried fish. That was his daily meal. An important lesson that he learned while living in this fishing village with his grandparents was that he observed that the fishing villagers all worked together as a unit. There would be a person on the hill who would look out towards the fishing boats, and if they caught a big fish, he would wave a red flag, and if they caught a small fish, he would wave a white flag. And the man on the hill would wave the proper flag to the villagers, and they would bring out the proper net for the boats that they had. After the fish were brought in, the villagers would separate the best and the largest fish and have it sold to the market. And the leftover fish was divided equally among the villagers. This practice of working together as a unit became my father's core foundation to almost everything he focused on for all of his projects and goals. At age 9, by himself, my granddaughter's age, he returned to the U.S. to join his father's new family. His father had remarried, and his new wife, Kishino Inoki, had 4 children. So now my father was the eldest of 8 children. When he was in 7th grade, at age 12, he had to leave school to work financially to help support the family. He first worked as a schoolboy for a Catholic priest and his mother. Then he worked picking tomatoes out in the fields. My father never ate tomatoes. At 16, when he was able to drive, he worked as a dairy for a dairy delivery service. He would use the younger kids to jump on his truck and have them deliver the milk and cream to each house. At 18, he became a manager for a produce market, and later even opened his own produce stand. Leaving that business to his father, he moved on to San Jose, where his sister Keetley lived. He coaxed his brother-in-law, Masaru Yamada, a farmer, to start the produce business in Oakland, which they did together. By then, he had married my mother, Masaru Yamada. Eventually, my father had more than 10 produce stands and markets around Oakland. He eventually became president of the East Bay Fruit Dealers Association. Because he refused to join the Teamsters Union, he was targeted and harassed many times by the Teamsters over and over again. They sued him, and he sued them. He was not intimidated by the Teamsters, even when they destroyed one of his stores. When war was approaching, the customers stopped coming. He knew he had to leave. It was when he heard that the Japanese Americans had a choice to either evacuate out of the military zone or be interned. He didn't hesitate. He knew what he was going to do. He was not going to be interned. My mother was born in Riverside, Utah in 1913 and lived there until she was 10. She told my father that the Mormons were very kind people. By the way, my mother went to school on a horse-drawn wagon. She churned butter. She and her mother churned butter and sold it at the local store. The grocer said that the ciabattas made the sweetest butter. When my father read in the newspaper that farmers in Utah are looking for hired help, and after hearing my mother's story, he decided to go to Utah by train to see for himself if Utah was where he wanted to evacuate to with his family. And so the journey to self-evacuation started. always loved music. I took piano lessons as a child, and it was easy for me to play the piano by ear. So often I play music by ear, not piano by ear. So often I would play, and my father would sit back and listen, puffing on his cigarette. He loved music, especially Irish music. He loved my Wild Irish Rose, O Danny Boy, Turalua, but his very favorite was My Darling Clementine. He would sit back smoking a cigarette and he would sing at times. That's how we connected. As a child, we rarely saw my father. He would wake up at 3 in the morning, go to buy produce. I would sometimes hear him brushing his teeth, gargling away the phlegm, then shuffle out to his car. He would come home at noon, take a short nap, return to work, coming home at 7 for dinner. Our family dinners were often very, very quiet. More than anything, after the war, my parents wanted to bring Clyde back to Japan, and they did everything to achieve that. They would invite Japanese athletes, businessmen, actors, actresses, politicians, etc., to show and prove to America that Japan is truly an honorable country. Many of these people even lived with us for a while. Companies like Shiseido, Polish, Churchill, Essex, Nikon, Unosa, even Hana Airlines, all of them came through our house asking for my father's advice. My sister Grace and I were always the servants, serving food and drinks to these Japanese guests. Even used to bring Japanese strangers home from off the street when we would steal things from the house. There was one incident where he brought home a young Japanese man. He was homeless. He was going through my father's produce garbage bin. My father brought him home, brought him clothes, mentored him, and he became a successful millionaire. He is still an extremely successful businessman in Japan. His story is truly an extraordinary story. I think my father became a real father to me when he was in his late 80s, when I would talk and he would actually listen for a change. What I mean was, he was retired and he didn't have any more of those challenges of businesses. We would talk and he would listen. He had time to listen to me, so when he was in his 90s, he was bedridden and we talked for hours. I asked him once if he was afraid of death, and he said, no. He says, when you die, you just die. I thanked him for not becoming an alcoholic like his father and his grandfather. And my father said, you know, it was really hard because I loved to drink, he said. He always drank at home, he always drank Japanese tea, lots of coffee, and his favorite 7-Up. I'm appreciative here. He lived a hard life, but he had this natural talent of taking a project and loved the challenge of making it his. Near the end of his life, I remember watching him in the ambulance as they were preparing to take him to the hospital, knowing that he would never return to his home again. He sat up, turned around to the house, put his hands together, and vowed to the home he loved. A house that he himself lived in for over 60 years. I'd like to end with a few stories. This one is about 2 different cultures. When I was in Honolulu at the airport, returning from a visit with my alien sister, I saw 2 older Jewish men saying their goodbyes, crying openly, loudly, hugging, sobbing, not wanting to let each other go. It was quite a scene. We were all moved and we were so struck. That was their farewell. Then there was my father and my uncle's Chimotoro's farewell. My cousin Ray had brought him over on New Year's Day. My uncle was frail, not well, and my father and my uncle, knowing that it would be their last time, most likely. They sat across from each other in the living room. Hardly a word was spoken, but I could feel this incredible, heavy energy that was passing between the 2 of them in that deep, deep silence. They had known each other for years, for almost all of their lives. What could possibly be said to express what was in their hearts? Finally, after a long while, my uncle said in Japanese, saw a coyote. It's time to leave, he says. Let's go home. After he left, my father said, for a long while in the darkness, then slowly went up the stairs. That was their farewell departure. On a lighter note, my father did have his sense of humor. One afternoon, after my brother Fred and my mother came home from Costco, my father saw all the rows of paper towels, paper drawers, styrofoam cups, napkins, etc. And my father comes in and he says, Mama, he says, you plan to live that long? The last story that I like to share is about my mother, Masako. An incident that describes my mother, I think, more than anything else, the best that I can. Something that occurs in my mind often. Around 1949, my mother and I had gone downtown on the bus to do some shopping. She had bought me a beautiful pair of black patent leather shoes. I was 7 and I was about to have my first piano recital. I was dancing down the street holding my mother's hand. I felt so happy with my new shoes on. Suddenly I saw from a distance a woman approaching and she had her hair pulled back, wearing a long brown coat. And she was headed straight towards my mother. My first thought was, oh, she's going to crash into Mama. Instead, she came in front of my mother and spat in her face. I could feel my mother's hand gripping my left hand, pulling me forward, and she said, it's all right. It's okay, she says. I think she lost her husband in the war. Kawaiso, poor woman. And so we went forward. That was my mother, and she has many tales of her own to tell. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Very nice story. I had my good and bad stories about my little bit. You know, but I've always known about all of his accomplishments. He did a lot of that. I was always kind of angry about how he raised his kids. So anyway, we won't talk about that much more. But next we're going to have Kai Waterwall and Andrea. Got some excerpts from an oral history on the grandfather.
This was, make this PG. We took out some of our grandfather's, yeah, some of his colorful words.
So I'm Andrea Wada. And this is Kai Wada, and we're Fred Wada's youngest, and I think favorite.
I didn't say that.
As our Uncle Stuart said, we're going to be reading an oral history that was taken in 1981 by the LA County Public Library and Claremont Graduate School. And I'm going to be reading the part of Enid Douglas, who was the interviewer, and Kai is going to be reading our grandfather's words. Here's some commentary. During the interview, our grandfather spoke about the situation before the war began.
Okay, so every time I talk, I will be my grandfather, Fred Watt. Well, when I was in Oakland before the war, I was doing community work, raising money for the community chest and the American Red Cross. That's why no Japanese leaders in Oakland were picked up by the FBI. Because they had done their share towards the American community, they were not picked up.
So you were in Los Angeles when Pearl Harbor occurred, and you finally returned to Oakland, and you saw you weren't getting any customers at the market, and there was a problem. And what happened next?
So I thought, you can't survive this way. So I thought we should do something about it. So in the meantime, the Army decided to evacuate all Japanese. They asked the Japanese through the newspaper to voluntarily evacuate from California, Oregon, and Washington. Move to Chicago or Denver or wherever they recommended for 2 or 3 months. They kept telling the Japanese to voluntarily move out of California. And so I thought the United States government gave us ample time, and they warned everybody. If they stayed, they wouldn't try to give jobs to Japanese or Japanese Americans. And if you're in business, you could hardly do any business. So you had to do something. And you didn't have to wait until the government put you in relocation camps. So it's all up to you. You have a family, and you've got to educate your children. So what could you do? You try to move from California to an interstate, you know, where there's less hatred. So that's what I thought. I'd go to Utah. And that's where my wife came from. I didn't know anybody in Utah, but I went to Utah to investigate the possibility of running a market, and that's how I lived.
In early February 1942, Hiawatha went to Utah to get permission to evacuate there. At one point, he met with Governor Herbert Ma.
Well, like I stated to Governor Ma, there were no disloyal Japanese among those I brought. He didn't know or understand Japanese people, but I knew there wasn't a single Japanese who wouldn't be disloyal to the United States or do anything like that. I told him my story. At that time, they didn't hang anybody in Utah, but you know, I said, I would be willing to face a firing squad, Governor. If anyone of the men or women are disloyal to the United States, you can shoot me, Governor. I talked to him, and I convinced him.
So here you are in February, actually over in Utah talking to people. That's really fairly unusual. It's an unusual story.
No, not unusual. Americans hate you in open. The public doesn't even like you or your business. You can't get any business.
But you responded and did something. I think that's what's unusual.
If you don't do it, it's on your head.
I guess it shows an amazing sense of initiative. You were doing it before you had orders, before you had deadlines. I think it's a fantastic story. What did you do, and what did you have to do when you got there into Keetley?
I leased this 63-acre ranch for $7,500, which was a lot of money, big money then. And at the time, it was covered with snow. I thought it was like California. Pretty nice land. But when the snow melted in May, God, it was nothing but...
I think that mean it was marginal land, probably, right?
Sagebrush, the rocks and holes, everything was like that. It was grazing land.
That's why it wasn't being farmed before.
But I fell in love with this place. It was the houses, a ghost town. Ghost town with apartments, and all these houses were interesting.
I was curious about these buildings you went into. They sound like they weren't in very good shape.
No, it's a ghost town. So they weren't decent houses, so we fixed them all up. We had the head carpenter, Masuda Yamamoto, who built our bathhouse. He was the head of that. We did nothing during March. April was planting time. And for a month and a half, we did nothing but fix up the old pipes, buy stoves, and fix up the houses because nobody lived there for a long time. So we had to fix all the houses.
Well, you worried about being cold, didn't you, I would expect? Did you try to weatherize them?
Yes, we weatherized and bought a stove. There was not a stove. Every family brought their own stove and fixed up the houses to keep themselves warm.
Were you given a credit if you went to buy something? Like if you went to buy a stove, where would you go?
We went to Heber to shop, and we paid cash.
What about if you got sick? How did you get medical care?
In Heber, there was a doctor, and the doctor and his family wanted Japanese housekeepers to help them, so we sent some workers there. They became very friendly, and the doctor's name was Dr. Werrick. His son was a doctor too, and the father and son, whenever we had a sick person, we called him, and he came right away to help us. They were very good, the father and son, practically free. He gave us service. So the whole town was wonderful to the Japanese after they understood us. At first, they didn't know what kind of people Japanese were, so they were very careful talking to us. After we moved to Utah, the government relocation authorities and the FBI came to check in on our operation, and they persuaded me to go to each internment camp, asking Japanese not to stay in the camps.
To get others to go out and do what you had done?
Yes. One time the government asked me to go and investigate with Japanese from the camps. I took 7 or 8 Japanese with me. We took the train from Utah to Denver, and then Denver to Texas. 8 of us in Houston. They put us all in jail. We were trying to go to New Orleans. They had all given us an offer to farm there, but we had to stay overnight in jail in Houston. But Washington authorities got us released. We stayed overnight in jail, and then we went to New Orleans to investigate the farming possibilities and all that.
So you were really actively trying to prevent the isolation of Japanese, such as in relocation camps, and to persuade them that they were better off assimilated into the American community. Also, this was a way to demonstrate commitment to West by, say, farming or doing what was needed. Is that how you put it together?
Yes, that's why I put the sign up that said "Food for Freedom." I try to raise food for Americans. I'm not particularly loyal, but if you are American, that's your duty. No one had to tell me that. You appreciate America, so you do your share. And when I went to the Dutchney County to meet the people at the church with my uneducated broken English, they listened to me. They spoke with sincerity. You're not afraid to talk because you feel you are an American.
Fred loved to fish, and he thought the children would enjoy fishing.
I went to see Senator Murdoch of Utah, asking him to give us some small fingerling trout, and he gave us 40 milk cans full of 500 fingerling trout. The Provo Fish and Game Department gave us 20,000 fingerling trout, and we planted each of these on our ranch, so the Americans were very nice politicians. After they found out we were earnest, it was very nice.
What kind of trout is that?
Eastern brook trout. We put them in the stream at our ranch.
This next part is about contracting for labor jobs. So part of the work you would do was go out on contract. In other words, you would just work.
Yes, we talked to different farmers. At a place called Spanish Fork, Americans don't want to harvest sugar beets. It's back-breaking work. Big sugar beets have to be cut and thrown onto the trucks. We did that in several places. We did it for 1 year. Other farmers wanted us to share crop of peaches and pears, and some people wanted to go there, and they gradually left. The girls, they went to Salt Lake City to work for American families.
These were the women who went as domestic workers?
Yes, and then during the winter there were no jobs, nothing to do. So I went to the Army and I asked them to give us jobs. And they finally approved the hiring of our younger people to do various work. I don't know how much of it was then, but $4 or $5 an hour. It was pretty good pay at the time.
And what kind of jobs were they done?
Oh, miscellaneous jobs needed at the Army camp, clean up, picking up the garbage or whatever, or dishwashing in the Army camps, something like that.
I read in one of the articles that at one time you were sorting tailings, metal tailings.
Yes, that's near Park City. They had a metal planting plant, and I contracted that. The Army wanted to help, and all the young men worked 1 season for them.
Did some of the families leave Keetley?
Oh yes, gradually we moved out. That was the main purpose. We didn't stay in Keetley to make farming a permanent project. The main purpose for Keetley was just a camp. From there, any chance they had to go and find a safe place to live and work, they would get out and go.
I didn't read this last part.
You want to go for it?
One statement that my grandfather said to Mrs. Douglas was, "Geez, Mrs. Douglas, I really never thought of thinking of these things in the past, and I'm looking into the future."
So that was our grandfather, Fred Wada.
Then we have Lance Kitagawa, who rewrote that diary that my Uncle Moss wrote and put it into a book. It has a lot of history and very interesting things about Keetley. All right, all yours.
Hey everyone, I'm Lance Kitagawa. I'm incredibly honored to be up here today reading words written by Misao Tsujimoto, my Uncle Moss, about some of his experiences while living at Keetley. His book is called A Letter to Ophelia. Uncle Moss wrote it in 1943, and I originally helped my mom create a special edition many years ago. Now we can proudly say that Uncle Moss is a published author, and his book is available to buy on Amazon. His stories are passed on to those who will listen. And when Uncle Moss spoke or laughed, and he laughed a lot, everyone listened. March 31st, 1943. Dear Ophelia, I'm sorry I couldn't write to you for such a long time. The last time I saw you was sometime in February last year in San Francisco, wasn't it? Do you remember that at that time, I mentioned to you a possible voluntary evacuation to Utah? Well, the plan did come through. Since I have plenty of time on my hands now, I might as well tell you all about it. Most of us have been on the vegetable ranch for the first time in our lives, especially as city folks. During the time we weeded our carrot patch, I couldn't tell the difference between the carrot plants and the tiny sprouting weeds. Veteran farmers had to tell me which were the carrots and which were the weeds. They were both about the same size and color and looked very much alike. We were sure busy then. We worked from 6 in the morning and sometimes from 5 in the morning till 6 at night. Many a time we worked till 8 p.m. and sometimes as late as 10:30 p.m. Once I worked till 12:30 a.m. That was the time we had to irrigate our lettuce patch under moonlit skies. Yes, we sure produced a lot of vegetables. But the markets of Salt Lake City were too small to handle all the vegetables. You must remember that the entire population of Utah is the size of San Francisco's population alone. The Safeway stores used lots of our crops. Some of our carrots were even shipped to Topaz Relocation Center. We gave quite a few of our fresh vegetables to our white neighbors who sure appreciated them. An interesting and embarrassing incident occurred one day while we were busy washing and packing the carrots. While I was packing them in bushel baskets, I accidentally dropped one of those big, long, yellowish-orange carrots, and I stooped to pick it up. You should have seen my embarrassment, as well as that of the other party, when by mistake, I grabbed the leg of one of the girls working with me. Somebody sure screamed. After all, they both looked so much alike in color and in shape. The only difference was that the carrot was raised in Keetley and the leg in Monterey. As I look out the window now, I can see the entire neighborhood and distant mountains completely enveloped by a white blanket of snow. I can just sit and visualize what is in store for us here in Keetley this year. During the past year, lots of water has flowed up under our bridge, and we're all looking forward to the arrival of spring so that we can again do our utmost to raise enough food for freedom. Well, Ophelia, I guess I covered just about everything there is to tell you about us here at Keetley Valley, so I better call it 30 now. Here's hoping that you'll be able to write to me in your spare time. Very sincerely yours, Moss.
Next, we have Brett Matsumura, who's going to read some stories of Keetley from the Endo family.
Hello. My name is Brett. As I said, I'm the oldest grandson of Nahuzo Endo. And Nahuzo was part of the Keetley clan with his 3 sons, my Uncle Jerry, as you heard, Jason, and my mother, Grace, and both of those have passed away. When I first talked to Mary about this event, she asked if I would talk about Nala. So my stories, fortunately, are pretty Keetley because there's always so many ways you can tell the Keetley story. Right? So hopefully some things of interest. But first, on behalf of the Endo family, I want to thank Mary and Brent and all of those organizing today's memorial event. It's been great, and it's the common bond we share together. I would also like to recognize Thomas Bernardo Endo for his research and documentation efforts regarding the Endo family history, and in particular the Keetley relocation events. Tom was my sounding board and principal reviewer of this work. We also recognize and thank Alice Endo Akins, my grandparents, for all their information that is referenced on that. And special thanks to my wife, Eileen, who helps me with all things in life, and especially things like this event. So, close our eyes. Imagine life in 1888. No internet, no TV, no radio, no cars, no telephone, let alone cell phones. This was the year and time when Nala Sugiyama was born in the area of Kanagawa, Ken, a prefecture in Japan, sandwiched below Mount Fuji and between the Pacific Ocean. She married Kikuzo Endo in 1905. Kikuzo was the oldest son of his family, and the Endo family also resided in Kanagawa, Ken. In 1906, at the age of 17, she immigrated to the U.S., arriving in Honolulu with her husband. In 1908, at the age of 19, she gave birth to Ichiro, the first of their 12 children. The last child, Hachiro, was born in 1928. Kikuzo and Nala enjoyed their large family and wanted to have their children understand and value their Japanese heritage and culture. 6 of the oldest children spent several years in Okikubo, Kanakawa, Canada, living with Kikuzo's younger brother, Shotaro, and his wife, Machi. As tradition would dictate, Kikuzo's oldest son would inherit the Endo estate, and the education and training in Japan helped prepare Ichiro for its future role. Shotaro's wife, Machi, was also now a sister, so the connection between the two family units was strong. Having some of the children raised in Japan also probably helped with the family budget in Oakland at the time. During that time period, federal law prevented Japanese immigrants from becoming naturalized citizens. There were different rules for immigrants from other parts of the world who could become American citizens if they wished, just not the Japanese. I suspect that this law was a reminder to Nao of her limited welcomeness to the United States. In 1935, her husband Kikuzo passed away at the age of 54, leaving her to raise her 12 children and leave the family folded. Through Nao's first 50 years, think of all the world events and changes the person was adapting to. Some of those world events were reminded: World War I, 1914 to 1918, the Great Depression from 1921 to about 1939. Modern inventions were coming on, such as the radio in 1901, the Wright brothers and their airplane, color photography, the Ford Model T, rocketry, and the invention of television, which was invented by Philo Farnsworth of Utah. And throughout all of this time, electricity was becoming more of a common use in appliances. So after Kikuzo's death, Nao was determined to take care of her large family, and she had a good business sense about her. She had remembered to be small in stature, but strong-willed and determined. The family had a home in Oakland where they continued to live. In 1938, Nao had the opportunity to buy the Yamato Shokai in Oakland's Chinatown, but needed help to run the business. She asked her son Frank and his wife Yoshiko to return to Oakland from LA to help run the store. Frank and Yoshiko agreed to help with the store, and then Nao went all in and scrounged the capital needed by cashing in life insurance policies in place for her children and borrowed money from close family members. She completed the purchase of the business and leased the property the business stood on. Nao and son Hiroshi drove from Oakland to LA to pick up Yoshiko and 2-month-old Alice, Frank and Yoshiko's first child. This is just one of the several examples of Nao's involvement in the activities she directed. She did not just send older children to bring Frank and his family back to Oakland, she did the work herself. After a slow start to the store, the business picked up and provided the financial support needed for the family. As the Endo family members had time, they volunteered to help in the store. This spirit of helping out and supporting each other continues to this day. At the start of 1941, Nao was a grandmother to 13 children, and by December had purchased a new home in Oakland for the family to move into. The older children had started to marry and move out on their own and residing in various parts of California, including Gilroy, Lompoc, and Los Angeles. The majority of the family still lived in Oakland. At the age of 52, Nao's life story included wife, Japanese immigrant to the U.S., mother, grandmother, homeowner, business owner, and most importantly, Endo family leader. Her achievements might indicate that it was time to enjoy life surrounded by this growing number of family members gained through marriages and additional grandchildren. However, that day of infamy, Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, will dictate otherwise. The motivations for the Endo family relocation to Keetley, Utah are generally known as we've talked today. But some of the specific stories that I'd like to share that have been retold are critical experiences that most likely helped shape her attitudes. And some of those experiences are when Koto and Wolf's son and 7th child helped Frank in Yoshiko at Yamato Shokai. He also worked at a produce store in Oakland owned by Mr. Fred Samuwada. One job Koto had was to deliver groceries to families who floated in order to to the Yamato Shokai because they did not have transportation. Goro's delivery route often took him along the San Francisco Bay. From 1940 onward, he noticed increased activity at the docks of a number of naval ships and military personnel at the Oakland Naval Base. Yoshiko remembers Goro telling for several times that it looked like war with Japan was inevitable. He often explained, it looks like war is coming. The last thing the Endo family wanted was military conflict with Japan. Like many Japanese immigrants, they were concerned about the treatment they would receive in racially bigoted California, as well as the welfare and safety of their relatives in Japan. Second, upon hearing the shocking news of December 7th, when the Imperial Navy of Japan attacked Pearl Harbor that same day, Nao decided to visit her mother, Ine Sugiyama, in San Francisco. Ine lived with Nao's younger brother, Kuzo Sugiyama. Nao asked Frank to drive her and a few other family members to San Francisco. On the way to San Francisco, when they approached the Bay Bridge, they were pulled over by military personnel who were impolite and used language filled with foul racial slurs. Their car was thoroughly searched, the back seat, spare tire, car jack, glove compartment, documents, and everything stored in the trunk was thrown on the ground. The family had to gather and put back the items before continuing on. The same search happened on their return later that day. Now was truly offended by the behavior of the military police. This traumatizing experience may have been the reason she would not allow her 3 school-aged children to attend school on that next Monday, December 8th, 1941. For fear of their safety, the children did not resume public education until the fall of 1942 when they were here in Utah. 2 of Nao's sons, Ichiro and Hiroshi, had married Iwamoto sisters. The brothers joined their wives' family in Sataro and Tokyo Iwamoto in Longport, California. It became known that Ichiro and Hiroshi were going to join Nao in the evacuation to Keetley with the rest of the Indians. Toki made the decision to join the group to keep the family together. Seitori Iwamoto, wife of Masakichi Iwamoto, also asked to join the group to keep the Iwamoto clan in Walmart together. Seitaro and his younger brother Masakichi were some of those arrested by the FBI on February 18, 1942, and eventually incarcerated at the federal detention prison, Fort Lincoln in Bismarck, North Dakota. Both men were later released after much effort by many to prove to the FBI that they were family men and not a threat to the United States of America. Perhaps the trip to San Francisco made Nao realize the U.S. government and many racially bigoted Americans were not going to treat people of Japanese ancestry fairly. As the treatment by the military police and the Bay Bridge suggested, they were no longer Americans, they were Japs. The arrest of Seitaro and Masakichi Iwamoto was another example of the new risks experienced by the Japanese community. The 6th son of Roy Okuno worked with Goro for Mr. Fredwada during his summer breaks from high school. Some of Mr. Wada's fruits and vegetables were sold at the Yamato Shokai. Frank Endo and Fred Wada came to know each other through this business relationship. This acquaintance that started in 1938 proved to be that significant factor that led to the Endo family's evacuation to this place. We've heard of the President Roosevelt Executive Order 9066, where the German aliens, Italian aliens, and all Japanese Americans, regardless of whether they were citizens or aliens, would be removed from military life areas. And then on March 2nd, Proclamation Number 1 came forward, which dictated all Japanese American citizens or aliens would be voluntarily evacuated from the prohibited zone of the Pacific Coast or be forced into relocation camps. When this happened, Nao was passionately committed to keep the family together. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the ability to talk to family members about the relocation move during these difficult months was very limited, and concerns of the government monitoring of communications was strong. The family had to rely on long-held family values family first, trust in each other, and duty to obey. As Nahal communicated her desires to Nobuzo and Michie, she told them, "We're ashamed to live under the government in the concentration camp to give assistance to them." Her traditional Japanese upbringing and will to be independent were strong factors in her decision-making process. In early March of 1942, Nahal sent Frank and son-in-law Roy to Tiki to investigate potential farming areas for the family to relocate to. Nahal instructed them to look up Yoshiko Tsuyuki of Salt Lake City, whom she had briefly met in 1933. Yoshiko's husband, Ikuzo Tsuyuki, was also from the Kanagawa camp, and at the start of this expedition, they went there, and Mr. Tsuyuki provided the car and driver that we heard Brett talk about, with Mr. John Aoki driving. After several days, they were not successful. They came back to US Cafe. Mr. Tsuyuki said, "Well, there's another person here from California looking to relocate his family as well." And as we know from Brett's story, that was Mr. Wada. That's what brought us together. So starting on that March 29th, relocating Endo Lombok group started the 800-mile car ride from Oakland to Keetley. Through Nahal's leadership, there was a total of 67 people that joined up in Keetley. 62 with the Endo Lombok group and 5 from the Nobuzo Endo group for LA. Then after the first season of planting was done in Keetley, Nahal and 32 people of the Endo and Sugiyama families moved out of Keetley to Crescent, near San Utah, in hopes of finding better opportunities. This, again, Keetley milestone was a catalyst for hope and better things in the rest of this history. Family values, traditions, and bonds established through marriages in the early 1900s were reinforced during this World War II relocation period, and were also recreated in the late 1980s by the 11 remaining children, Nahal and Ikuzo. U.S. Army PFC Hachiro Endo died in 1951 at Heartbreak Ridge during the Korean War. The 11 aunts and uncles, as they are fondly remembered, asked the extended family members to come together to reacquaint them today. This greater sense of family has been displayed every 2 years at the Endo family reunion, where the Endo, Hirano, Iwamoto, Sugiyama, and Tachiki families meet in the Reno Tahoe area for a 5-day event of sharing, community, and remembrance. All of these family tree branches can trace their roots back to the Kanagawa camp. And our typical reunion has over 200 people in attendance and has been on our calendar since 1989. It's a now spirit and inspiration guides us each and every day. Thank you for your time.
The next speaker is Nahal Miyamoto, who's going to tell us a little bit about his dad, who was in the 442nd.
All right, thank you, everybody. My name is Nahal Miyamoto. I'm the grandson of Fred and Masako. And as the only one who inherited the fishing team, I think I always thought of myself as the favorite grandchild. It was Isai, probably. But my father, at the time, and I wanted to put a little bit in the context of Keetley and the greater experience of Japanese and Japanese Americans. So on December 7th, my father woke up in Honolulu. He lived in the Makiki district, about 6 miles as the crow flies from Pearl Harbor. The Japanese torpedo bombers flying overhead. And my uncle came home later that day, and like others have said, they threw everything that had any Japanese writing on it into the burn barrel and destroyed it, because they knew it was going to burn. And that was Executive Order 966. And as Brent mentioned, 38 days. The Keetley evacuees had 38 days from the time the evacuation order came out to when they had to report, and they were no longer allowed to evacuate. But that wasn't the case for all Japanese Americans. So those on Bainbridge Island near Washington had just 6 days. So can you imagine having 6 days to take everything you own, find a home for your pets, and pack one suitcase, which is what evacuees were given. They were given one suitcase to report to an evacuation center. And so for 110,000 Japanese, this really wasn't an option. And for many who didn't know where to go, who didn't have those resources, they just weren't able to evacuate. And so it really makes the whole Keetley story for Dora remarkable. Only about 5,000 Japanese Americans are known to have been able to leave prior to the evacuation orders. So those remaining 110,000 were sent off to relocation centers, evacuation internment, whatever you want to call them, across the western United States. My father, along with many other men, in 1942, the government decided that they were going to allow Japanese Americans in Issei to register and sign up to fight in the war. And so my father became one of those volunteers in Honolulu. About 2,700 men volunteered in Hawaii and about 1,500 from the mainland. Now the experience for Hawaii Japanese is very different. They made up about 30% of the population at the time of the Hawaiian Islands. And so taking all those Japanese and interning them in Hawaii would have decimated the local economy because they made up most of the labor force. And so they were not interned. They had a very different experience there in Hawaii. A few thousand were rounded up and sent off, like the others have mentioned, to camps and imprisoned. But the majority of the population was left in place. So when the soldiers got to to training, the first thing that happened was the Hawaii boys and those from the mainland didn't get along. Fights broke out, the Hawaiians were very brash and loud, and the mainland Japanese were very reserved. But their Hapajin officers had a plan, and they sent many of the Hawaiians off to see the internment camps. And overnight, everything changed. One soldier recanted, geez, these guys are better than us, right? How can they volunteer to fight for America when their families are in prison? So that became one cohesive unit. And they went off to the shores of Italy and France to fight. My dad recounted the first encounter with the Germans when the machine gun fire started coming at them. And they all hit the ground, and he said, I was too afraid to raise my head. And members of the 100th Battalion, who had been in service for a couple of months before them in North Africa, came right through and routed the Germans out. He said, my dad says, by the time he raised his head, he couldn't even see them. And then that afternoon, they got chewed out by the rest of the soldiers of chickens. You gotta get in the fight. And so from that point on, they went on to become one of the most, they became the most highly decorated unit of its size in U.S. military history. And throughout the war, one of the most famous battles where they were sent out to rescue the 36th Battalion, where several hundred men cut off behind enemy lines. And my father's unit went into battle with 186 riflemen. And for 5 days, they fought to reach and rescue this battalion that had been cut off. And at the end of that battle, the K Company that he was part of, only 17 were able to walk out. So they suffered enormous casualties. And they earned 7 presidential unit citations. That's the same award given to the Navy SEAL Team 6 when they captured and killed Osama bin Laden. So you can see the scope of what they achieved. And though it took decades, 21 members of the 442nd were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Now, 2 of our family, Ben and Bill Warner, volunteered as well. They were sent and they joined the MIS, the Military Intelligence Service, which was a very secretive unit at the time. About 6,000 Issei served with the MIS as translators in the South Pacific. And one general recanted that the MIS and Issei probably reduced the length of the war by about 2 years and saved 1 million American lives. And certainly more than that in Japanese lives by ending the war earlier. There are 3 men that fought their internment. Really, when you think about all these tens of thousands of Japanese Americans, only 3 men fought their internment. Minoru Yasui, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Fred Korematsu. And Fred Korematsu later said, I only refused to become and report for internment because I didn't want to leave my girlfriend. He had an Italian-American girlfriend, and he didn't want to leave her. All 3 of these men fought their cases to the Supreme Court and lost. And years later, their cases were all overturned when it was shown that the U.S. government had suppressed information that would have shown that the Japanese really, there was no threat. And all 3 were eventually, some posthumously, awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Now, in 1988, the U.S. government signed the redress bill into law, signed by President Reagan. And it repaid $20,000 to all the survivors of the evacuations. But more importantly to those Japanese Americans, I'm sure to many of you, it was a formal apology from the U.S. government to recognize the injustice that had been done. And that kind of brings us back, I think, to Keetley, and really to think about how remarkable it is for what happened there. About 5 years ago, I was here on business in Salt Lake City, and folks at the plant there said, hey, you should drive out and go have dinner at Park City. So my coworker and I headed out after dinner, and as we're driving out there, I called my wife, Michelle, and if you Google Park City right now, and you kind of scope out on the map, right in the middle of this reservoir, it says Keetley. And she says, it says Keetley where you're living. And I'm like, really? So I started Googling this as we're driving out there, and then all of a sudden in this Jordanelle Park, it says Waterway Mountain Bike Trail. And I'm like, really? Is this our Wada, right? Is this our family, really? So we made our way here to this building, to this little information center on the other side of this building, and the ranger said, yeah, that's probably, there's a historian around, local historian, and we had done a lot of research in this area and suggested the name of the trail. And she handed me a little pamphlet about some of the history of this area. And so we drove out, if you go, and it's kind of right across from here, the Waterway Trail, really on the other side of the lake. If you haven't been over there yet, there's some great new signs that have been put up about the Keetley evacuation. And we walked on the trail, and it was dark and cold. It was just about dusk, and I took a few pictures, and I started looking around. And it was like I was transported back in time to that moment, and I could see through my grandmother's eyes, because she would tell this story to all of us grandkids about arriving in Keetley. And she cried, and she said, Papa, how are we going to take care of these people, right? We arrived in these rundown houses in the land out there. This is beautiful here. On that side, you just see scrub brush and brown dirt. And that's what they saw. But they also survived, right? They made it through. The Japanese have this word, come on. Like, tough it out. Just deal with what you've been given. And that's what they did. And at the end of the day, what they did was that they were able to be free. They weren't interned. They could freely go about, they could work and go to school, and that was really the difference. And that is really what makes the Keetley evacuation so special. And so I want to thank you for coming all this way, for all that you've done to inspire us to share your stories, and so that we can remember this and never forget about what you've done. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, I would like to thank Mary Wada and Yamada. I won't say her last name. Everybody knows she's been running around. And May Kimigawa. They did most of the work in here, but I'm going to have May thank the rest of the people. I guess she had lots of helpers in this whole job.
First of all, I want to thank my niece, Christine Hasegawa, who is the granddaughter of Ruth Tsujimoto Hasegawa. She arranged the catering today, the lunches, and she provided the sorbet. It was yuzu sorbet, and she made it all. Unfortunately, due to illness, she wasn't able to come today. I'd also like to thank Miley McGinn. She's the granddaughter of May Yamada, and May Yamada Kong, and she is the artist who designed our band today. Did you stand up? And Miley is from Honolulu, and she is an art student. And I also wanted to point out that the drawing of the house is where I lived for the first 4 years of my life here in Keetley. And that drawing was done by my nephew, Stuart Johnson. And then I also wanted to thank my son, Lance Kitagawa, who is the son of Nobukazu and Toshiko Tsujimoto. And he is a graphic designer. And he did the artwork on the fan. And he published Letter to Ophelia by my uncle, Mas Tsujimoto. And he did a number of graphic design projects for the Keetley reunion. He was always on call. And then my sister, Nancy Yamauchi, helped make the hachimakis today, which are going to be given to the men. And Miwako Yamada, our dear Miwako, who did the lettering on them. And then Diane Zhang, my cousin, who provided the kimonos that you're going to see and the hockey coats for our Obon dancing today. Of course, I wanted to thank my brother Stuart, whom we're very grateful to for helping us put on this reunion.
Okay, thank you again, everybody. Thank you for coming, and thanks for all the help everybody did. We're going to take about 10 minutes, so everyone can just kind of step aside. They're going to clear out all these chairs, and we're going to see people dance. Okay, thank you very much.
circle goes like this counterclockwise. Yeah, the
opposite way that the clock goes.
I gotta. Nice, Dana. And
Yeah.